In 2023, something incredibly disturbing happened in Hialeah, Florida, a city in Miami-Dade County known for having a large Hispanic community. What made it so shocking was that it happened in what seemed like a normal home, with a family that didn't show any outward signs of trouble. A 13-year-old boy named Derek Rosa did something that was not only horrifying, but also completely unexpected, leaving the entire community and even seasoned police officers stunned and confused. What made it all the more difficult to understand was how ordinary everything appeared before it happened. Derek was born on August 26, 2010. At the time of the incident, he was living with his 39-year-old mother, Irina Garcia, in a small unit at the Amelia Oaks apartment complex, located at 211 West 79th Place in Hialeah. Also living in that home were Irina's partner, Frank Ramos, who was Derek's stepfather, and a newborn baby girl, Derek's half-sister, who was only 2 weeks old at the time. Frank worked as a truck driver, which meant he was often away from home for long stretches, driving across different states for his job. Irina stayed at home, looking after the children and managing the household, especially with a newborn who needed a lot of attention. Derek's biological father was no longer with Irina, but he was still active in Derek's life and reportedly had a good relationship with him. To everyone who knew Derek, his relatives, teachers, classmates, he seemed like a perfect kid. People described him as quiet, respectful, and very well behaved. He was doing really well in school and went to I Matter Academy in Hialeah, where he was in the 8th grade and part of the honors program. His academic performance was strong, and he regularly made the honor roll. Teachers viewed him as a smart and focused student. Family members described him as gentle and kind. One relative even said they couldn't imagine him ever hurting anyone, claiming he wouldn't hurt a fly. There was no known history of mental illness, no behavior problems at school, and no signs, nothing at all, that pointed to anything being wrong before what happened. But everything changed on the night of Thursday, October 12th, 2023. That night, Frank Ramos was away, likely working on one of his long-distance trucking jobs. Irina was at home with the baby. At some point in the evening, security cameras captured Derek coming and going from the apartment. One of those cameras, a doorbell cam, showed a short and normal-looking moment between Derek and his mother. Around 7:45 p.m., Irina was sitting near the front door while breastfeeding the baby. She told Derek not to run in the apartment. Derek, sounding like a typical teenager, asked her in Spanish why she always told him that. It looked like nothing more than a routine exchange between a mother and her son. But underneath that surface, something serious was already going on in Derek's mind, something nobody else knew about. In the days right before the murder, Derek had made several very troubling searches online using his devices. These searches showed clear signs that he had been planning what he was going to do. He looked up things related to the human body, including diagrams of arteries. Then he moved on to much more alarming questions, such as,
what is the best place to stab someone?
Okay, what's next?
Is a small knife good for killing?
What's next?
Is it easier to kill someone with a small knife?
What's next?
Can a knife cut through bone?
He also searched for information about machine guns, though it wasn't clear how that part fit into what he was planning. Altogether, he made at least 7 different searches that showed he was seriously thinking about how to carry out a deadly knife attack. Later that night, around 10 o'clock, Irina went to bed. She lay down with the newborn baby sleeping next to her. Derek acted like he was going to sleep too, heading to his room as usual. But instead of sleeping, about an hour later, around 11, he quietly got up, walked into the kitchen, and picked out a knife. It was a 12-inch kitchen knife with a purple handle. He hid it and walked carefully and silently toward his mother's bedroom. What he may not have realized, or maybe just didn't care about, was that a baby monitor in the room was recording both audio and video the entire time, capturing everything that was about to happen in that room. When Derek walked into his mother's bedroom, he went over to where she was sleeping. As he stood near her just before starting the attack, he said a word out loud in Spanish, maricona. That word is a strong insult in Spanish, used to describe someone in a very offensive way, often suggesting they are weak, useless, or silly. It's the kind of insult meant to irritate someone or hurt their pride or dignity. It's still unclear what Irina might have done that would cause Derek to feel that level of anger or resentment toward her. Right after shouting the insult, Derek stabbed her in the neck. The knife went into a major artery. He quickly pulled the knife out and then stabbed the other side of her neck, cutting through another important blood vessel. Because arteries carry blood under high pressure, this caused the blood to spray out forcefully.
There's some red stains there. Is that blood? I think it is. Okay. And a little bit of blood on my hands. On your hands too? Yes.
Irina woke up immediately and began screaming from the pain and shock. She fell off the bed and landed on the floor, struggling to survive. But Derek didn't stop. He kept stabbing her repeatedly, continuing the attack even after she stopped moving. In total, he stabbed his mother 46 times. Even after she had clearly died, he continued to stab her. The whole attack was described as being extremely violent and completely lacking in compassion or hesitation. During all of this, the newborn baby was still in the room. Amazingly, the baby stayed asleep the entire time. There were no signs of crying or waking up. It's frightening to think what could have happened if the baby had woken up in the middle of the attack and how close she came to possibly being harmed as well. Once Derek was done, he quietly walked out of the room. He then went to look for one of his stepfather's guns. His original plan, after killing his mother, was to end his own life. But when the time came, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he chose to reach out to someone and talk about what he had done. The person he decided to contact was someone he only knew through online gaming, a friend who used the name Sweden. Derek didn't just tell Sweden what had happened. He also sent him a deeply disturbing photo. In the picture, Derek was making a playful hand gesture known as the shaka sign, where the thumb and pinky are extended while the other fingers are folded in, and he had his tongue sticking out. What made it especially upsetting was that his hand in the photo was still covered in his mother's blood. It was a shocking image to receive. Sweden, who had no idea that Derek was planning any of this, was understandably horrified by both the picture and the confession. After sending it, Derek also typed out an apology to him and said goodbye. There's no evidence that Sweden had anything to do with the crime or that he knew anything about Derek's intentions ahead of time. He just happened to be the first person Derek decided to contact afterward. Soon after messaging Sweden, Derek used his phone to call 911.
201. I see officers. Do I leave? Do I leave my house?
Do not leave.
Okay.
He spoke in a calm and respectful voice. Based on how he sounded, it would have been hard to guess that he had just done something so violent. He started the call by asking the dispatcher if they spoke English. When they said yes, he answered, "I speak English. How can I help you?" That was weird, but he asked for police to be sent to his apartment. When the dispatcher asked if he was alone, Derek said he wasn't. His baby sister was there, still sleeping in the room. The dispatcher then asked him directly if he had killed his mother. Derek admitted it, saying, "Yeah." When they asked where the knife was, Derek paused before answering. He said he thought he had left it on the floor, but he wasn't completely sure exactly where it was. The dispatcher wanted to get a clearer understanding about a gun Derek had talked about earlier. Derek explained that his stepfather, who worked as a long-distance truck driver, had taken one of the guns with him when he left for work. But there was still another gun inside the apartment. Derek said this second gun was on the couch in the living room. He told the dispatcher that he had already loaded it and pulled back the slide, which means the gun was ready to fire. However, he had decided not to use it. He asked the dispatcher if he should go ahead and unload it, but she quickly told him not to touch anything. Derek also mentioned that there was a knife in his own bedroom. In response, the dispatcher instructed him to stay completely away from all weapons and to avoid moving anything until the police arrived. During the call, something nearby made a noise that caught Derek off guard. He sounded a little surprised, but then realized it was just one of his mother's handbags that had fallen to the floor. The dispatcher stayed calm the entire time and kept Derek engaged in the conversation. She told him to stay where he was in the living room, to keep holding the phone, and not to pick up or carry anything else.
Where is your sister?
She's in her crib sleeping. I did not kill her.
How old is your sister?
She's only like a week old.
You did not touch her, correct?
No, I did not touch you. I didn't want to touch my sister.
Derek then asked what he should do if his baby sister woke up while he was waiting. The dispatcher reassured him that officers were already on their way and told him that if the baby did wake up, he should just speak to her gently to keep her calm. At one point, Derek repeated that his mother was dead. He also mentioned that his stepfather was calling him on his phone. The dispatcher told him not to answer that call and to stay on the line with her instead. A little later, Derek brought up something that seemed to be bothering him. He asked, "Was it bad that I took pictures and told my friends?" When the dispatcher asked him to explain what he meant, he said that he had sent photos of the murder to someone he knew online. The dispatcher stayed calm and reminded him once more not to leave the apartment and to wait for the police. Derek then asked if it was a problem that he had touched different things around the apartment. She told him not to worry about that right now. After that, the dispatcher asked a very serious question. She wanted to know why he had done this to his mother. But Derek didn't answer directly. Instead, he mentioned again that his stepfather was still trying to call him. The dispatcher stayed focused and reminded Derek to keep calm. She also asked him whether he needed medical help himself. Derek told her no, he wasn't hurt, but he did have blood on his hands. He then asked her how the police had gotten there so fast. The dispatcher explained that situations like this are handled as top priorities and that officers are sent out right away. When she asked who he had sent the photos to, Derek said he had only shared them with one person, an online gaming friend who went by the username Sweden. He added that he didn't know Sweden's real name. Derek's voice stayed fairly calm through most of the phone call, but there were moments where you could hear the fear and uncertainty coming through. He seemed confused and clearly nervous about what was happening. He also seemed concerned about how his baby sister would react when the police came into the apartment. He mentioned his stepfather several times during the conversation, which showed that even after everything that had just happened, he still seemed to care about him and the baby in some way. Derek did apologize more than once during the call, but he never gave a clear reason for why he had done what he did. The entire call showed a boy who had committed a horrific act, but was now starting to realize the weight of what he had done and was trying to make sense of the reality he was facing. After Derek finished his 911 call, he stayed near the front door of his apartment and waited calmly for the police to arrive. He remained in that spot for almost 18 minutes. During that time, the doorbell camera outside his home was still recording, and it showed that he looked very shaken. His face was pale, and it was clear from how he looked that he was scared. When the Hialeah police got to the Amelia Oaks apartment complex at 211 West 79th Place, they approached the unit with their guns drawn because of the serious nature of the call. As soon as they made contact, they arrested Derek.
Get on the ground! Go!
He didn't resist or cause any problems. The officers then took him into custody and brought him to the police station for more questioning. Inside the apartment, investigators started carefully going over the scene.
There's a knife in my room.
The knife is in the room!
There's a baby.
How's the baby? Did you do anything to the baby?
No, I did not touch the baby.
Everything Derek had told the dispatcher earlier was confirmed by what they found. In the kitchen, they came across the main weapon used in the attack. It was a 12-inch kitchen knife made of stainless steel, and it had a pink handle that made it stand out. One important detail was that the blade was broken at the tip. Later, during the forensic examination, they found that missing piece of the blade stuck in one of Irina Garcia's bones. That discovery confirmed not only what knife was used, but also how much force had been involved in the stabbing. In the master bedroom, officers found Irina Garcia's body on the floor. She had been stabbed 46 times. The wounds were all over her body, on her neck, chest, stomach, arms, and legs. According to one of the investigators, the only part of her that hadn't been cut was the area right behind her knees. The whole scene was extremely violent and disturbing, and what made it even harder to take in was the fact that the person responsible for this was her 13-year-old son. Even more surprising was that Derek's baby sister, who was only 2 weeks old at the time, was still in the same room where the murder happened. She was unharmed and still sleeping quietly, just a few inches from where her mother had died. Police safely took the baby out of the apartment and handed her over to her paternal grandmother. She would take care of the child until the baby's father, Frank Ramos, was able to come back from his long-distance trucking job. As officers made sure the newborn was safe and cared for, they also began trying to understand the deeper, more difficult question that had no clear answer yet. What could have caused Derek to do something so extreme and violent to his own mother? That night, after some hours had passed, detectives from the Hialeah Police Department brought Derek in for a formal interview. At about 2:50 in the morning on October 13, 2023, he sat down in the interview room. The detectives explained his Miranda rights to him, telling him that he had the right to remain silent, the right to have a lawyer, and that anything he said could be used in court. Derek said he understood those rights and agreed to talk without a lawyer present. During that interview, he began to explain what had happened. Most of what he said matched what he had already told the 911 dispatcher earlier, but this time, he also gave a few more specific details about how the events took place.
You killed her? All right. What type of knife was it? Do you know?
It was just a big size kitchen knife.
That big?
Yeah.
What color was the handle?
Purple.
Purple?
Yes.
Okay. Your mom was sleeping?
Yeah, she was sleeping.
As the interview went on, the calm and steady way he had spoken earlier started to shift. The detectives began to sense that he might not be telling them everything or might be struggling to say more. They asked him clearly whether he'd gone near the baby or done anything to harm her. Derek answered no and made it clear that the baby had stayed asleep the entire time and that he hadn't touched her at all. When they asked him about the stabbing, he said there was a lot of blood and that his mother had screamed during the attack. Then they asked him the most important question. Why did he do it? At first, Derek didn't answer. Instead, he asked if he could use the bathroom. When he came back, he seemed a little unsure and asked the detectives whether he should wait to have a lawyer before saying anything else. Because that question suggested he might want legal help, even though he didn't ask directly, the detectives were required by law to stop the interview. In Florida, especially when dealing with someone so young, if there's any sign that they're thinking about getting a lawyer, questioning has to stop immediately. Even though the interview ended there, the information Derek had already given them, along with what he said in the 911 call and all the evidence from the crime scene, was enough for the police to officially charge him with first-degree murder. In the days that followed, investigators kept working carefully to collect and examine more evidence. They reviewed the footage from the doorbell camera at the front of the apartment and went through the video and audio files from the baby monitor camera that had been in Irina's bedroom. They also looked through Derek's electronic devices and uncovered his internet search history, which clearly showed signs that he had been planning the attack ahead of time. They went over the full 911 call again and took a detailed look at everything found at the crime scene. All of this information, taken together, gave police a full and very clear understanding of how the murder happened and showed that Derek had prepared for it in the days before carrying it out. Because the crime was extremely serious, Derek Rosa had been accused of murdering his mother. Even though he was only 13 years old at the time, Florida law allowed prosecutors to charge him as an adult. That decision meant he would go through the same legal system and face the same possible punishments as an adult would, instead of staying in the juvenile justice system. Right after he was arrested, Derek was held at a juvenile detention facility in Miami-Dade County. But not long after he arrived there, concerns came up about his mental health and whether he would be safe in that environment. Because of those concerns, he was transferred to Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami, where he could undergo a full psychiatric and psychological evaluation. While he was at the hospital, he was diagnosed by a licensed psychologist with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD. This condition affects things like attention span, impulse control, and levels of physical activity. Another medical expert also evaluated him to see if he might be on the autism spectrum. It's important to note that neither ADHD nor ASD is known to cause violent actions on their own. However, ADHD can sometimes make it harder for people to control impulses, manage emotions, or make thoughtful decisions. Even so, after all the evaluations, the doctors did not find any direct connection between these conditions, and the act of murder he was accused of committing. When the hospital evaluation was finished, Derek was sent back to the Juvenile Detention Center. He was the youngest person there. Most of the other inmates were around 16 or 17 years old, so he stood out because of how young he was. Since the charges against him were related to such a violent crime and because there were concerns for his safety, the staff placed him in a private cell. The window in that cell was frosted, so he couldn't see out and no one could see in. He was mostly kept apart from the other juveniles and didn't have much interaction with anyone except for the guards who were assigned to watch over him. Because of this separation, he couldn't join other inmates in regular school classes or participate in common activities like sports or group programs that are normally part of juvenile detention routines. His lawyers, who were well-known and experienced, argued strongly that he was not being treated fairly because of his young age. One of Derek's lawyers, Jose Baez, who's famous for defending Casey Anthony, took on Derek's case. He and the rest of the defense teams said Derek was still a middle school student, an 8th grader, and still liked playing with Legos, which they pointed out to show how much of a child he still was. They claimed that the conditions he was being held in were basically solitary confinement, a method that has often been criticized when used on minors. They said he was alone for most of the day, with very limited interaction or learning opportunities, and that this isolation was harmful to his mental health and a violation of his rights. On November 30th, 2023, a hearing was held in court in Miami-Dade County to review how Derek was being housed and to hear the arguments from both his lawyers and the prosecutors. Several of Derek's family members, including his grandmother and other relatives, attended the hearing and spoke emotionally on his behalf. They asked the judge to allow him to live in a place that was less restrictive and to make sure he was able to keep up with his education, which they felt was especially important because of how young he was. One family member emphasized again that Derek was still just a kid, trying to remind the court of his age and vulnerability. The prosecutors, though, did not agree with the defense's arguments. They said the conditions under which Derek was being held were appropriate and necessary, especially given how serious and violent the alleged crime was. They called what he had done an act of evil and said that even someone his age could pose a real danger to the public. Because of that, they felt it was important to keep him where he was. After hearing both sides, the judge decided not to move Derek to a different location. He would stay in the Juvenile Detention Center under the same conditions. However, the judge did make one change. She ordered that updates had to be given to the court every 2 weeks to report on how much time Derek was spending outside of his cell. This rule was meant to help make sure that he wasn't being mistreated and that his situation improved, at least in terms of how much time he had outside of isolation. Around the same time, Derek's lawyers were given permission to go back into the apartment at the Amelia Oaks complex where the murder had taken place. They were allowed to spend 3 hours inside the apartment, along with a forensic expert, a professional photographer, and one of the attorneys. The purpose of this visit was to gather more evidence that could help with Derek's defense in court and to make sure they had access to all the details needed for their legal strategy. Derek Rosa's trial was originally supposed to begin on February 26, 2024, but that date had to be pushed back. His defense attorneys said they still hadn't received several important pieces of evidence from the prosecution, which they needed in order to properly prepare for the case. This missing evidence included video from police body cameras taken when officers arrived at the scene, full results from forensic tests done on the crime scene evidence, and lab reports on a few specific items. Those items included a 12-inch kitchen knife, a broken piece of that blade that had been found lodged in Irina Garcia's bone, and the clothing Derek wore that had blood on it. Judge Richard Hirsch, who was handling the case, didn't hide his frustration about the delay. He told the prosecutors directly that they should have turned over all this material much earlier, especially given how serious and complicated this case was. It involved a charge of first-degree murder against a juvenile, which made it even more urgent. By January 2025, no new trial date had been set yet, and the case was still waiting to move forward. For Irina Garcia's family, including her mother and her partner Frank Ramos, This tragedy has caused enormous pain. Derek's relatives are also deeply affected. They are dealing with a devastating situation on both sides. They lost Irina, who was a mother, daughter, and sister in a violent way, and they also lost Derek to the legal system. Even though the case has drawn public attention and involves very serious charges, Derek's main lawyer, Jose Baez, and his team are representing him without charging any legal fees. Baez is known nationwide for taking on difficult criminal defense cases, and in this case, he and his team are working for free. Still, the family is facing large financial challenges. While they're not paying attorney fees, they do have to cover major expenses like hiring expert witnesses, getting special forensic reports, and running independent forensic tests that could help with the defense. To help with all of this, the family launched an online fundraiser. According to the latest available information, over 5,900 people have donated to the campaign. Together, they've raised nearly $150,000. Even after what happened, members of Derek's biological family continue to support him. They seem to believe that although he made an incredibly serious and terrible decision, he is still a child in need of serious help, not just punishment. They hope he'll be able to get mental health treatment, continue his education while in custody, and one day have the chance to return to life outside of prison. But there are still major questions that no one has been able to fully answer. The biggest question is why Derek did what he did. Investigators, lawyers, and the public are all trying to understand what led a boy who appeared to be a well-behaved honor student to commit such a violent act against his own mother. Another unresolved issue is the role of a person known as Sweden, an online friend of Derek's who was the first person Derek contacted after the murder. Derek sent this person disturbing photos of the crime scene. Right now, it's unclear whether Sweden was just someone who happened to receive these messages, or if that person may have had some deeper influence or involvement. There's also a much larger question that people continue to ask. Can someone who murdered their own mother and then shared images of the crime ever truly change? Can a person who did something like that be rehabilitated and safely rejoin society? People have very different views about what should happen next. Some, including his family and supporters, believe that Derek can be helped and that he deserves a second chance because of his age and possible mental health issues. They think the focus should be on rehabilitation. Others believe just as strongly that because of how brutal the crime was, Derek should never be released from custody. In the end, it will be up to the courts to review all of the evidence, hear both sides, and make the final decision. Only time will show how this very tragic and confusing case will be resolved.